What's up, y'all? Chakra-X here. I'm here with a review of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch. I've had it since day one of the release. A little before then, but I wanted to wait until the day one patch dropped out so I could give a fair review of the game in its entirety. And anyone who knows me, who follows me on Twitter, knows I've been excited for Sonic Forces since they announced it as Sonic Project 2017. And there were parts of the game that I liked that I got really hype about. But overall, I was really disappointed with this title. And I'm going to dive into why that is. Sonic Forces is definitely trying to replicate the success that Sonic Generations had before it. I'm a fan of the Boost games. I love Generations. I really like colors. So after seeing the initial gameplay footage of Sonic Forces, I was really excited to get back into it. And let me just say up front that I did have fun with Sonic Forces in bits and pieces, but there was a lot of detracting events that frustrated me by the time I've beaten the game. And I was really liking some of the additions that I saw, such as Sonic's aerial boost sends him upwards a little bit when you do it in midair. And that really helps with clearing obstacles and attempting speedruns and such. So there were things like that that made me hopeful for the final game. For me, modern Sonic's gameplay is definitely the best and most polished out of all three gameplays in Sonic Forces between modern Sonic, the Avatar character, and classic Sonic. He controls a little more stiff at max speed versus how he played in Generations, and his jump, his mid-air jumping physics takes some getting used to versus previous games, but I eventually adapted to it. What really surprised me with Forces was how much I enjoyed the avatar and all the customization. Clearly, customization was a big thing for Sonic Team from the get-go. Even if you take out the fact that there's a lot of just recolors of other items, there's still a lot of items to be found and unlocked throughout the game, which encourages, at least for me, replayability just to see what kind of new gear I'll get, especially since it's cosmetic. And what was a nice surprise for me was when you unlock the Wispons, which is the weapon that the Avatar uses. I was not aware until I first played the game that there were different attributes depending on which type of Wispon you had. So not only could you have a hover Wispon or a burst Wispon, which had different powers in itself, you would have different enhancements for each weapon. So maybe one weapon gives you a boost of speed after you stomp down on the ground, or another weapon gives you a shield at the start of a match, or another one reduces the amount of time it takes for you to get back up after being hit by an enemy. And little things like that, I want to see more of, like little tweaks to gameplay to fit how your playstyle is going to feel. But even after all that customization, the Avatar's 2D momentum really started to bother me a little more than halfway through the game. Like there would be points in gameplay that required very specific time jumps. If I was not prepared to deal with the platforms, I would have either not stopped in time as the character, or I would have ran a little too fast into a hazard. There's a lot of good and interesting features that they brought to the game through the Avatar's customization and its level design. Getting a chance to slow down as the Avatar and actually interact with the environment seemed cool, and it was cool for me in the first third of the game, but eventually, once I realized how short each levels were and how repetitive level design became for both the Avatar and modern Sonic, the novelty wore off quickly by the rest of the game. For both modern Sonic and the Avatar, their levels are very linear compared to previous titles. I know the Boost gameplay gets a lot of flack for being linear compared to the adventure titles and what have you, but I feel like Forces is the most egregious offense out of all of them. There are many times where the characters do not need to turn, they just go straight down a hallway, either boosting through enemies or using your Wispon to just mow down a string of enemies until you get to the next 2D section, which reminds me a lot of Colors. Colors' 3D levels weren't the most advanced, but they made it for it with intricate 2D levels. But even the 2D levels of Sonic Forces remain to have very uninspired layouts and repetitive enemy placements that eventually, after a few tries, get a bit boring over time. And some levels are the exception to the hallway criticism, but they are few and far between. I will say the lack of any kind of live system in Forces is very welcome. So now when you're hunting for red rings or other collectibles, when you die, you don't have to worry about restarting the entire level. You can just jump back to the next checkpoint, and the only penalty you have to worry about is your time taking longer and getting penalized for having too many retries after a death, which I think is a fair trade-off when you're trying to gun for S ranks. Now, in terms of classic Sonic, he's absolutely my least favorite type of gameplay in Sonic Forces for a few reasons. Virtually all the classic Sonic levels came off as very bland to me. Compare them to, I'm not going to compare them to Sonic Mania, since that uses an entirely different engine and it was entirely different vision by a different team. But even comparing classic Sonic's gameplay to his Generations incarnation, his levels at that time were a lot more varied, had a lot more routes to take, while the classic Sonic and Forces has very direct paths, super generic enemies to take out. And honestly, most of the layouts just do not take advantage of what makes classic Sonic great. Like straight out, the first few seconds of Chemical Plants known as classic Sonic, you cannot make up a ramp due to his lack of momentum in this game. And it just feels like they added him in to attempt to tie him to Mania and to stay, I guess, relevant for fans who prefer classic Sonic. But it's just frustrating that, pre-Sonic Mania, we had a decent classic Sonic, in my opinion, in Sonic Generations, and for them to take a step back from that in Forces had a chance to give classic Sonic some new original levels that didn't rely on nostalgia or revisited levels, but every unique level for classic Sonic just felt very empty, very uninspired, and every time I played a classic Sonic level, it just felt like a chore to get back to the modern Sonic and Avatar stages. Another issue I had with the game was the general progression of the story and the action. The first third of the game was when I was having the most fun. The story beats made sense, going from Sonic's defeat to his heroic return to Earth to help his friends and the Resistance fight Eggman's army and eventually confront Infinite again for the second time. In fact, the first boss with Infinite, between the cutscene with him and Silver and the actual boss fight with him, was probably my favorite boss fight in the entire game, because you get a real sense of speed, the hazards aren't annoyingly difficult, and the music is bumping. In fact, Infinite's themes throughout the game are just one of my favorites in a Sonic game in a while. But pretty much after the first Infinite fight, we start jumping around from different locales, and I do appreciate that they attempted to ground the Sonic universe by using Chemical Plant and Metropolis as strategic war points. But we bounce around so much from different locations, and the actual stages are usually only 2 to 3 minutes long, if that. I never get a real sense of a grounded locale for each level. I compare this to like either Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors, and especially Sonic Adventure, where you spend a decent amount of time in each area, so every level had a strong identity attached to it, because you would see the nuance in design and music attached to these levels. And it's the shame because you can really see the Hedgehog Engine 2 at work in the background of these stages. Like, you have these huge vistas going on in the background, but it's all background. And all times that we do interact with the scenery are just level 2 pretty much quick time events. In terms of the story, I was really interested in Forces' story from the get-go, because it seemed like a return to form to the more, I guess, dire situations of Sonic series video games. I'm not looking for, super gritty Shadow the Hedgehog or Sonic 06 stories, but I felt like games like Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Adventure 2 hit a sweet spot of lightheartedness versus serious, the world's gonna end kind of thing. And the game does a good job with these story beats, like seeing Infinite appear into the Avatar in mid-level, foreshadowing an eventual showdown with the two, were very cool things that I don't think I've seen that much in Sonic games. And it definitely seemed like they wanted a more serious story, sometimes going a little over the top, like telling us that Sonic is being tortured, but then the next scene he's just chilling in a jail cell cracking jokes at Zabak. Sometimes I felt like the game didn't know what it wanted to be. Because the game is so short, there's never a sense of direness. Like, for instance, the level where you get sucked into null space. I expected like a really wacky, like alternate dimension kind of a level where Sonic and the Avatar have to fight through infinite virtual reality minions to get back to the heroes. But it's literally over in 15 seconds, and you bust out, and the theme song is playing, and it would have been really cool. But because I never really felt like Sonic or the Avatar were in any kind of danger, or I didn't have to play through anything to get back to the Resistance, the attempt of coolness kind of falls flat for me. And falling flat in general seems to be one of my biggest issues with Sonic Forces. Like earlier in the year, we learned that Shadow, Chaos, Metal, and Zavok are working for Infinite, but we weren't sure if they were copies of the originals or if they were brainwashed, or if we weren't sure what they were. But I was really excited to get a chance to fight Shadow again, or see Chaos Zero as in the first time in a while in the context of a war. Spoiler alert, they are just, quote, virtual reality copies of the originals. Their unique powers and personalities really do not play any role in this video game outside of nostalgia of knowing how awesome they were in their respective games, which bothers me a little bit because it feels a little disingenuous that they would advertise these characters so hard in their media, but then once the games come out, they don't really do much in themselves. Like honestly, if you replaced every character that Infinite brought back in the video game with generic Infinite minions, it would have had the exact same effect because they never did anything story-wise outside of a few weak references to their powers.
Whoa, chaos!
And I get that Sonic Forces is a budget title, being priced at $40. I was not expecting it to be as full-fledged as previous Sonic games, but if you're going to go for an epic save-the-world story and all the levels are beaten in like 2 to 3 minutes each, and the game itself can be beaten to 5 to 6 hours, and you try to pad the gameplay with collectibles that don't really unlock much outside of even smaller, more tedious extra levels, I feel like it was a misstep. Like if you want to go Epic Sonic, I'm down with you, Sega, but this was not the way to do it. I will say the music of Sonic Forces definitely grew on me. After beating the game within the first 2 days, I initially felt like the soundtrack was just okay for a Sonic game, which really bothered me because usually even if a Sonic game is bad, you can expect the soundtrack to be bumping. But then I took a chance to listen to the soundtrack by itself because all the radio chatter kind of drowns it all out. I'm a big fan of the Mystic Jungle's Sonic level. It's probably the most Sonic sounding song because of how often the guitars come in. But Infinite's theme and every rearrangement from Boss Battle 1 to the final, I was in love with. I felt they leaned a little too hard into the EDM and drum and bass sound, and with a few exceptions, classic Sonic's music was overall very bland to me as well. It sounded like Sonic 4's soundtrack. I don't know if it was the music itself or just the instrumentation, like the faux Genesis style music that they use, but most of classic Sonic's music was just not working for me at all. And for me, the final nail in the coffin was they built up Infinite to be this really cool, badass, overly edgy character. His voice actor really drives home his like super like intellectual but vicious lines to the characters. That he was one of my favorite parts of Sonic Forces because he was just so over the top villainous. And I think a game like this, which is marketed to kids and is supposed to be a little darker than previous Sonic games, I thought he fit that role perfectly. But his resolution at the end, his boss battle is pretty much a clone of Metal Sonic's, where it's just a bigger version of them flying in front of you. And after you defeat him, the cutscene implied that he would come back in his true form as the true final boss, but we never see him again. But then at the same time, I'm not sure if he's inside Eggman's Death Egg robot at the end. I'm not sure what happens to him. Like, I assume there's some kind of sequel, but the way they played it out made it seem like there would be a true boss to fight Infinite. So overall, it felt very anticlimactic to build him up as like this awesome character that's stronger and faster than Sonic, and then he just falls, like a sack of potatoes after you're done beating him. So overall, I was really looking forward to Sonic Forces, and now that I finally had it and I beat it, and I've S-ranked all the story missions, it's just, the gameplay is way too linear for Sonic and Avatar. All the stages go by way too quick. It just comes off as a poor lackluster attempt to replicate generations and colors. And that's what's really frustrating in all this, is that we've had previous Sonic games where I was super frustrated by the controls of Lost World or the super lame deaths I would have in it, but it definitely had a stronger identity. It knew what it wanted to be. Even if I didn't want a Sonic game to play like a Mario game, it at least felt like they were trying something different. Some things worked, a lot of it didn't, and they went back to the drawing board. And Forces seemed like they were trying to be safe by harking back to the Generations gameplay, but to even fail to replicate and improve upon that is just super annoying and disheartening as a Sonic fan, to wait for a new game, play it, and just see again that a game that was supposed to either be as good as Generations or even better, to just fall behind on that. And do not let me or any other negative reviewer tell you to not enjoy this game. If you enjoy this game, if this is one of your favorite Sonic games, or if you just had fun despite its flaws, great. So did I. This game is fun for me. I still play it despite having beat the story. I play Mario Odyssey and I hop back to Sonic Forces just because I like Sonic games. But it's really hard for me to ignore all the flaws this time, just because it was supposed to be Sonic Team treading back to their safety net, when in actuality it was just a cheaper knockoff of that safety net. If I had to give Sonic Forces a number, I would definitely say this would be a 6 out of 10 for me. Has its fun moments. I really enjoy most of the story. I love Infinite. It has a really good soundtrack, and the game is gorgeous, but there's too many flaws in its linear level design, its uninspired classic levels, and its janky, not quite refined Avatar gameplay that, while still more fun for me than Lost World or the Boom games, it still falls short of the quality established in previous Sonic Boost games.